This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
To this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. But first, a quick run through the markets here for you. So Nigeria is having an absolutely fantastic day. And fantastic doesn't quite describe it. This is the biggest one-day gain we've seen on the main share index in Nigeria since April of 2015, according to Bloomberg data. Essentially, this takes its year-to-date position up to about 7.7% just in gains. But the gains are not as broad-based as you might have expected. Dangote Cement, for example, up almost 10%, MTN Nigeria up nearly 6%, and Zenith Bank up 9.5%. It does seem that the thesis at the moment is that you're not going to get returns on fixed income. You might as well apply back into some quality shares to get some decent returns. Here's what's coming up tonight. Zambia's president is asking the country's central bank to stabilize the country's weakening currency as the odds of default rise. The Canadian firm Caledonia Mining plans $400 million of investments in Zimbabwe. And a top court in the EU rules that member states must curb mass spying on individuals' data. Our starting point tonight is Zambia, where the country's president, Edgar Lungu, has requested the country's new central bank chief to stabilize Africa's worst performing currency. Mr. Lungu's call comes as Africa's second biggest copper producer starts a debt restructuring process, or at least talks on it, less than a year before general elections. Zambian Eurobond holders will be voting on the 20th of October on whether or not to grant the government's request for a 6-month interest payment suspension. A group of investment firms made up of 14 US and Europe-based financial institutions has already rejected that proposal. The kwacha has weakened by about 40% against the American dollar and roughly 34% against the euro so far this year. As I mentioned, the meeting between Zambia's finance ministry and the holders of its $3 billion worth of Eurobonds is barely a fortnight away. The offer on the table at the moment is to not make any interest payments between October and the end of March, effectively up to April 2021, in exchange for deferred payment sometime in the future. Now, the finance ministry in Africa's second largest copper producer says it needs that 6-month window to finalize a debt sustainability analysis and prepare a debt restructuring plan. But investors are pretty skeptical. A group representing the holders of those Eurobonds rejected that deal at the end of September. And that in turn sets the stage for what might be the first default by a sub-Saharan Eurobond issuer amidst this pandemic. Creditors are demanding greater transparency on Zambia's public and publicly guaranteed debt load, as well as a clear path to fiscal sustainability. So then, where do we go from here? Earlier, I spoke to Emgard Erasmus from NKC African Economics. I started our conversation by asking her why holders of Zambia's Eurobond see a deal with the IMF as being an important precursor to any kind of debt restructuring.
At this stage, the policy linchpin that the IMF represents, bringing in just clout in terms of policy transparency, that Zambia is actually addressing the underlying policy problems that led them into this problem of the unsustainable debt in the first place. That will be the critical linchpin. It's also how you can juxtapose the Angola and the Zambian case. Whereas Angola is arguably in a worse position than Zambia has been, looking in terms of principal payments that's been due this year, severe pressure on the oil market, etc. Just that important role of the IMF as the linchpin of policy, quite signals policy transparency going forward, much more comparative debt reporting, and ensuring accountability standards are being adhered to. And on the other side, also the crowding in of additional financing that the IMF draws with the clout that the name carries. However, we do believe, as we've seen in Ethiopia in 2018, a restructuring on the project loan side, specifically from China, might be kind of a precluder towards an IMF program. However, the Eurobond holder is likely to persist with some of the holdouts before they really get the IMF as quite the pivot around just ensuring that Zambia will adhere to policy transparency, and specifically with Zambia's 2021 elections coming up, just to ensure that we are not running into the same problem 10 years down the line.
Indeed, and from the IMF's perspective, it also introduces a, for lack of a better word, reputational risk, doesn't it? Because they've been talking to Zambia about their debt issues, their fiscal transparency issues for years, and yet here we are at this point in time in this crisis. So from the IMF's perspective, you could make the case that do we continue engaging and still end up in the exact same problem, or do we just give up and say, you know what, let the chips fall where they may?
Yes, indeed. As you've mentioned, the IMF and Zambia has been for various years, like at least 3 years, really been at loggerheads where Zambia is going towards in terms of the policy trend, and also critically to rein in recurrent expenditure.
We certainly can't get back to the old days of the highly indebted poor countries debt relief initiative and debt write-offs of that sort again. But just taking this to its logical conclusion, at one extreme end, if we have a default from Zambia, might this be the bullet that essentially kills off the market for Eurobonds from African issuers, at least in the medium term?
If you're looking at the short term, we actually think the contagion risk of the Zambia event to Sub-Saharan Africa is only low to moderate at this stage. There's quite a differentiation that you can make in terms of the Zambia situation coming into the pandemic versus some of the other creditors of the other Sub-Saharan African Eurobond issuers. For Zambia, it was pretty much a question of when, not if. And with the 2022 maturity coming up, I mean, bond prices were already pre-pandemic pricing in that Zambia will not be able to fulfill its obligations. However, there's a lot of like moving parts, as you mentioned, and also a lot will actually, unfortunately, to bring in the US elections or other global trade developments into it, but a lot actually depends on what will be the risk on or risk off mood in the market at this stage. It might be a singular event that doesn't spill over from Zambia to the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa if external conditions is highly favorable. However, should there be like a perfect storm of negative kind of factors contributing to one big Zambia, especially the disorderly default, then unfortunately we'll likely see spreads jumping on the whole region once again. However, if you're really scrutinizing the underlying fundamentals of these countries, this might actually once again present a tactical buying point for some of the investors. So we can't fall back into the whole herd mentality where Africa is a country. Unfortunately, there's a lot of differentiation that exists, and the spillover effect likely will be that some of the countries will be punished, like for Zambia's faults. However, of the medium term, it really should come back to quality differentiation.
Now, elsewhere, a study commissioned for the ruling ANC lawmakers in South Africa says that the countries should be looking to Ethiopian Airlines to rescue its insolvent state carrier SAA. Earlier this week, Africa's largest airline pledged to provide planes, pilots and maintenance services to its beleaguered rival. Now, while the offer of operational assistance is evidently being put on the table, the Ethiopian Airlines CEO has made it quite clear the company is not interested in helping out with the debts and the costs at SAA. South Africa's national carrier last made a profit in 2011. It entered bankruptcy protection last December. The government needs over $600 million to get the airline off the ground yet again. South Africa's government is planning to auction off even more than $483 million worth of high-speed internet spectrum following years of delays. President Cyril Ramaphosa included the auction of internet capacity in plans to revive Africa's most industrialized economy earlier this month. Now, South Africa right now is in the middle of a deep recession with an existing slump exacerbated by lockdowns intended to combat COVID-19. With the details, here's CGTN's Angela Coppola from Johannesburg.
The move will help to revive the economy by producing increased investment in broadband while forcing data costs lower. But it's not been an easy process.
You're asking companies to provide a service, to build a hotel, but not give them the ground on which to build it. So the fact that South Africa's operators have been able to provide 4G and 5G services is entirely because of their ability to reform and repurpose the spectrum that they've got, which is for 3G.
There hasn't been any new spectrum allocated since 2005. The new spectrum will be auctioned off in March 2021, if everything goes according to plan.
It's incredibly important that they get access to additional spectrum because they have relatively little spectrum when you compare them with the amount of spectrum that operators in many other markets have. So the spectrum will allow them to finally deploy robust national 4G infrastructure, and it will also allow them for the first time to start to deploy 5G networks across the country.
The operators tell you that 5G is a profoundly useful technology for freeing up older spectrum, for providing better, higher quality services with less capital expenditure, fewer base stations, all of the good stuff.
Operators will build their expenditure and revenue budgets, but there should be spin-offs for consumers in terms of quality of reception and price.
There's also a potential for prices to come down. We know the operators have said on a number of occasions in the past that if you give us access to additional spectrum, it will allow prices to come down because we don't have to spend so much money building our network. This is particularly true in the rural areas where if you use the digital dividend bands, you won't need to build as many base stations.
Cost of development is a key aspect of the operator's business planning, and the price tag for the spectrum is significant.
The operators say the less they pay for the license fees, the more incentive it gives them to build bigger networks. It's a good argument, but they are very profitable companies.
It's been nearly 5 years since the deadline expired for that spectrum to be released, and now everybody's chomping at the bit, ready to go. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
All right, then a quick run through some company news. Let's start in the world of banking. London-based Atlas Mara is set to sell 100% of its Mozambican banking subsidiary, Bank ABC, to Nigeria's Axis Bank. That decision comes after Kenya's Equity Group walked out on the deal in June. Axis Bank will pay Atlas Mara upfront cash equivalent to roughly 80% of Bank ABC's Mozambican assets as of end June this year, which will make additional cash payments some 2 years later, subject to certain conditions. Subscribers of Kenya's telecommunications giant Safaricom have more than doubled their borrowing from the overdraft service, Fuliza, as it's commonly known here, in the 6 month ending in June. Fuliza loans rose to roughly $1.7 billion in the period from $746 million a year earlier. That essentially translates to a daily borrowing of roughly $9 million. The jump came as East Africa's most advanced economy shed over 2 million jobs on the back of some fairly sluggish corporate earnings. The antivirus software magnate John McAfee has been arrested in Spain over tax evasion charges in the United States. Now, prosecutors argue that he earned millions of dollars through the promotion of cryptocurrencies, speaking engagements, consulting jobs, and the sale of the rights to his life story for a documentary. But they say he never filed tax returns. Mr. McAfee has not publicly commented on the charges. If convicted, he could face up to 30 years behind bars. And for the first time since 2011, Apple did not release the latest version of its flagship iPhone in September. And that delay has had a fairly significant ripple effect throughout its network of tech suppliers and vendors. Foxconn Technologies are most affected. Its Hon Hai Precision Industry unit, which assembles iPhones at factories mainly in China, posted a 21% drop in September sales. And the company is not alone. Largan Precision, which makes camera lenses for smartphones, also reported a decrease of 22%. That's a run through your company headlines. On the plus side, though, for you Apple fans, there's an announcement coming through on the 13th of October. So there's a new iPhone coming through. Here's what's coming up next. The Canadian firm Caledonia Mining plans $400 million of investments in Zimbabwe. And we'll continue with our special series exploring food production across Africa.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business. Only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference. Welcome back to the program. Caledonia Mining Corporation is in talks to acquire assets that would expand its gold mining operations in Zimbabwe. The Toronto-based gold producer is targeting both privately held assets and mothballed mines that are owned by the state. Now, the miner hopes to make an announcement on at least one of the assets by the end of 2020. These acquisitions could help Caledonia boost its annual output by more than a factor of 8 to 500,000 ounces, as the company considers investing nearly $400 million in Zimbabwe over a decade. The Southern African nation is battling to attract investors as it struggles with food and fuel shortages, as well as a crackdown on political opponents by President Emmerson Mnangagwa. In East Africa, Uganda's unemployment rates are still a matter of concern. 13% of young people over there are out of work. But a local initiative is trying to change the narrative by empowering the young, particularly women, with artisanal skills that might help them become self-reliant and financially independent. From Kampala, here's CGTN's Leon Sanyange.
Tumukunda Solange puts the finishing touches to her work. The 18-year-old high school student is happy to have learned carpentry.
I was so interested when I heard about these skills, and I wanted to join, to have another skill apart from formal education.
Babiria Mariam is also putting her hands to work.
I'm excited to do this. It's a hands-on thing. We have made furniture that can be used at home. It gives us confidence that we can do better.
The coronavirus pandemic has created an employment crisis among Uganda's young people. Women are the most affected. The young women here are now able to make a chair. It's a skill they've learned in just a few weeks. And already interest among other women is growing. Evelyn Zalwango is behind the Fundi Women Initiative.
We're teaching them a bit of business and entrepreneurship. Can they be able to do this as a business? And we are getting more partners who are going to teach them about financial banking. How do they understand if I have to start a business? Well, what are those things I should require if I have to approach the bank?
After 6 months, the women here will be expert carpenters. And with these new skills, they may not need to look for a job if they can start their own business. Leon Sanyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
We're still in East Africa. Despite a decline in premiums so far in the year, some of Kenya's largest medical insurance companies expect this pandemic to accelerate consolidation in an industry that raked in nearly $400 million in premiums just last year. Now, the number of companies in that space has risen by nearly 60% between 2015 and 2019, but the industry is still highly concentrated. Just 4 companies account for 54% of total premiums collected. When Kenya first reported its first case of COVID-19 on the 13th of March, that set off an interesting row between medical insurers, their reinsurers, and the regulator on if insurance companies should actually cover the costs of treatment. 200 days later, what's changed? I spoke to the 4th largest firm in that space, Resolution Health. I started my conversation with the firm's CEO by asking him why the company would not be going back to its old office-centric operations even after the pandemic is over.
So with the actuaries and the claim assessors, when it first came out, they told us to set aside $3 million specifically for this, with an opportunity to increase, but it did not hit us that way. So right now we're just managing like any other upper respiratory tract infections. But what we did is develop protocols, home-based protocols for our patients, an ability to deliver treatment directly to them, sending drugs at home through using riders. Negotiation with medical service providers, because we were one of the few insurance companies that didn't have an exclusion. So we needed to make sure that we manage it well. So by the time people were discussing between themselves, the insurers, the government, we already had our product in place.
So for you, this entire thing is not going to punch a hole in your books, is it?
Not at all.
All right. And that also does lead me to another question that I have in mind, because the thing that we're seeing with trends in hospital visits during this pandemic is that because of the restrictions on movement, because of curfews, because of social distancing, people have been a lot more reluctant to actually go into hospitals. To what extent did you see hospital visits decline?
The first month claims dropped by 50%. On the basis of delays in scheduled cases. So if you had a surgical case, you postpone it. And then regular visits in hospital for upper respiratory tract infections, hygiene-related issues like diarrhea and vomiting, that went down. Although conversely, our revenue also went down, but the claims went down heavily, sending a message that it's possible that majority of the cases that we used to see in the hospital are actually not valid.
So essentially, with these simple measures, this idea of keep social distancing, wear a mask, wash your hands as much as possible. In fact, perhaps the latter about washing hands, that focus on hygiene, that perhaps has actually reduced the net disease burden in a way that we couldn't have expected.
Certainly, it's interesting when human beings are forced to do something, and the effects that you see after that. We never anticipated that we had such a big effect around the hygiene area in this part of the world.
Do you think those trends are going to continue into 2021? Because the macro picture suggests that, yes, we're seeing job losses, we're seeing incomes decline, which should imply that premiums at the very least should fall. Do you expect to walk into 2021 with a relatively flat year, or do you expect a bit of growth?
Flat. So our numbers in terms of revenue has dropped by 20% in comparison to what we expected to see. Actually, they are slightly lower than 2019 numbers. But fortunately, the bottom line is better because the claims are lower. However, after the opening up of the economy, what we've seen the numbers starting to come up, but I don't think they'll come up with the numbers we saw in 2019 and 2018.
Moving forward then, what do you expect will change in 2020 and 2021, particularly in that discussion that we referred to earlier between medical insurers on one hand, regulators on the other, and reinsurers as well? Because initially when this pandemic hit and everyone was like, yo, we're not touching this is a pandemic, it's excluded. But 6 months on, 9 months on, has the thinking around that changed?
Yes, so there was a bit of push and pull with the regulator demanding that the insurance companies should cover COVID. A lot of people had an exclusion for pandemic. Some insurance companies opted to cover as and when a claim comes. We didn't have that luxury because we didn't have a pandemic exclusion. If we were sued, we'd have had to pay. So we developed the protocols. What has happened is because of the impact has not affected insurance companies as much, I believe most insurance companies are going to continue covering it.
Away from the world of insurance, let's head over to the business of food, focusing on our ongoing series on food production in Africa. Here's Lindy Mtongana taking us to Egypt, Nigeria, and Uganda, where we focus on fish and rice production and the challenge of how to deal with the waste of food. Over to you, Lindy.
In today's second installment of CGTN Africa's series on food production, we take a look at bulk production and food waste in Africa. With the rising demand for nutritious animal-based protein, Egypt is expanding its production of fish. Since 2015, the country has witnessed a boom in fish farms that has seen production increase by nearly 25%. The World Fish Organization has been one of the active arms in assisting the country to introduce new technologies and empower youth in this sector. Through its projects, nearly 4,000 fish farmers have been trained on best management practices, new technologies, and ensuring the best use of water resources and feeds. CGTN's Adel Al-Mahroui has more.
Egypt produces 2 million tons of fish every year. It's the 7th largest producer in the world and the top in Africa. Aquaculture's share is 80% of that market. With water quality and environmental pollution becoming a growing challenge for Egypt, fisheries are becoming the most reliable source for supplying the market with good quality. I'm here in Abbasa village in Sharqiya governorship, about 2 hours drive northeast of Cairo. This is one of the biggest fish research facilities in Egypt. It's managed by World Fish, a leading international organization that helps nations develop their fish quality and production capacity.
Our studies here at World Fish have shown very clearly that farmed fish is much more safer than fish that comes from other systems, because you don't know the systems that are there. In farming fish, you have control of everything that goes into the pond. You're also able to control fish health. We have almost cut zero any use of antibiotics because the fish are kept in the right environment.
Harrison Carisa's PhD research was made in this facility focused on tilapia fish. Researchers here are currently working on developing newly adopted system called In-Pond Raceway System, IPRS for short. It proved its efficiency in catfish. Now Egypt is becoming the first country in the world to test that system on tilapia.
You don't need to change the water. You only add a little bit. In a regular pond, the water is static, and then there's no mechanism to remove the waste. But in this pond, you have a system where you can remove, in that place you can also remove the waste.
This project produces an average size fish, but the brilliance of this technology is that it can go up to 2 production cycles a year, giving it an advantage of producing 4 more times fish than regular ponds.
Carissa showed me how they're using polypropylene instead of concrete to cut the IPRS cost for local breeders. With 2 years in return on investment, and at a cost of at least $8,000, the technology is still too expensive for local breeders. Once the fish was out of the pond, Ahmed Abu Muhammad showed up. For more than 30 years, he has been trading fish. But he only works with fish farms that he has inspected before and trusts their breeding process.
The years have built my reputation, and that's something I cannot risk. So I only buy from the farms I know how they breed the fish. There are people who manipulate some steps in the process, which will reflect in the fish's taste. Some have poor water quality or bad fish food. Here, the fish is always good, and when I sell it to the trader, they ask for that same fish once again.
Ahmed takes the fish to shops in the local market. This is Obur, the biggest food market in Egypt. In the fish section here, some clients are still not comfortable with fishes coming from farms.
Fish farms do not produce any fish varieties, only catfish and tilapia. It's why I prefer sea fish. They taste better and the quality is good.
For the Egyptian masses though, catfish and tilapia are the most affordable, so demand here is phenomenal.
Some people think fresh catch fish tastes better than in farms, but that's no longer true. There's always growing demand on the farms. Some clients do specifically demand farms fish, and catfish is the #1 popular fish in Egypt. There's always room to supply the market. We always need more.
Because it's one of the leading fish producers in the world, Egypt is becoming a hub for Africans to learn about the industry. Since 1998, World Fish has trained some 4,000 people from 112 countries. At least 1,000 of them are Egyptian.
We launched here what we call the Fish for Africa Innovation Hub. This is a game changer in my opinion, because it's going to help African countries to access Egypt in a more organized manner. We want to have entrepreneurs coming here to learn. We want to have innovators coming here to test their new innovations.
I left World Fish heading to Ekwa. It's among the smallest and poorest villages in Egypt. I came to see how Ahlam Saeed is selling her fish in this humble market. She is one of the benefactors of World Fish Women Empowerment Program.
I was forced to work in the fish business. I didn't like it at all. In Abasa, World Fish gave me theoretical and practical training. They taught us how to manufacture fish, how to market ourselves. They increased our confidence to take bolder steps. I then learned about the online business. I now sell well. I know how to negotiate.
Before her World Fish training, Ahlam told me that she used to sell the remaining fish stock at the end of the day at half or 1/3 the price, or else it'll get ruined. After her training, she started taking back the remaining fish. At her workshop at home, she processes them into different kinds of salted fish and sells them online at an added value.
Medina? I sell online in Zagazig city. There is demand for my work. In the countryside, women don't mind saving 30 cents and doing it themselves. They have no job. But in the city, a woman has a job. She doesn't want the hassle of added work, so she buys it online.
Ahlam, on her micro scale, has been maximizing her revenues from the business. Egypt, too, is expanding massively. The national target is to reach 5 million tons of fish annually. It will need all sorts of innovations, especially those to expand sea fisheries. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Sharqiya, Egypt.
Nigeria is undergoing what some have termed a revolution in local rice production. From being a global net importer of rice, Africa's largest economy is now on the verge of becoming one of the biggest exporters of the product. CGTN's Deji Badmus has been looking at the efforts of the smallholder rice farmers in helping Nigeria achieve self-sufficiency in rice, a very popular staple in the country.
If everything goes according to plan, Nigeria will achieve self-sufficiency in rice in the next 2 years and even begin to export. And if that happens, it will be thanks in part to local rice farmers like John Sauta. He's one of over 10 million local rice farmers across Nigeria who are contributing their quota to help the country attain food security. And Sauta does not just grow his own rice. He does the milling as well at his small rice mill right in the middle of his rice farm in Nasarawa State, north central Nigeria.
We started with just a hectare. I don't know, it's up to a hectare itself. And then we use basically our hand, we use our own labor. We don't have machineries then. So we in fact, it's more of human labor. But as times goes on, when we are, as we upgrade on, we are able to get a bigger hectare. And today, we are using machineries.
The expansion of his rice enterprise was partly made possible through a low-interest loan scheme known as Anchor Borrowers Program, driven by the country's central bank. Launched by the government in 2015, the loan scheme essentially provides farm inputs in kind and cash through a special microfinance bank known as NISAL to smallholder farmers to boost production of some key commodities.
With the support we had from the government, though little support, and we appreciate the government for that, we've been able to get these machines from China, and then some being fabricated here in Nigeria, like the parboiling system. We have a miller, destoner, polisher, a big, Then we are milling just a capacity of 500 kg in a day, but now we're milling about 24 tons in a day.
From just 1 hectare when he started out, Sauta's rice farm has also expanded to over 10 hectares. And even that, he says, is not enough.
But we also as well partner with other farmers to buy their product, and then we go to the market too to buy product, even though at times you face these challenges of not getting the right seed.
While the special loan scheme has indeed helped in boosting domestic rice production to an average of 7 million tons per annum, agribusiness experts say much still needs to be done to ensure farmers benefit directly from the initiative.
The mindset of the policy is to get to the root of the farmers so that they can get the benefit. But accessing those benefits is always a challenge.
While the central bank has restricted importers of rice from accessing forex through the official market, these restrictions have led to a huge decline in imports. Local rice farmers are now filling the void and creating jobs in the process.
We started as a one-man business, but today we have up to 15 staffs. So now, even without the government job, you now discover that because of this company, we're able to actually provide jobs for people around.
It's certainly a good time for rice farmers in the country. They are now in a race against time to help Africa's largest economy achieve rice self-sufficiency. And if they are able to cross the finish line in the next 2 years, that will be a remarkable turning point for a country that is still struggling to leverage on its huge agricultural potential. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Uganda is experiencing a build-up in food stock following the closure of the country's borders to stop the spread of the coronavirus. On top of a bumper harvest, the restrictions on transport have left farmers struggling to sell their produce, leading to food waste and a severe decline in food prices. CGTN's Michael Baleke tells us more.
Jennifer Chirabo has cut down on business trips across the border. Banana farming has sustained her for over 20 years. But she says this is the first peak harvest in her lifetime that hasn't borne fruit for her financially.
Before the pandemic was announced, I used to harvest over 50 bunches of bananas every Sunday. But now I'm stuck with food. Every farmer in my village is stuck with food. It's so frustrating.
Jennifer lives 5 kilometers from the Uganda-Rwanda border. Much of the food here is sold across. But since March, all Uganda's borders have remained closed to small-scale traders like Jennifer.
We obtained loans for agricultural inputs like fertilizers, seeds, and we used some to pay school fees, hoping to pay back after the harvest. We now risk losing our properties to the banks.
Much of the bananas produced in Uganda are consumed locally. The surplus is exported to neighbors like Kenya, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and South Sudan. Some of these bananas are due for harvest, but there is no ready market. And instead of letting them rot away, Jennifer collects them and feeds them to the animals, which have also run out of food because of the drought. Just like banana farming, dairy farmers in this region are also experiencing surpluses. Mirabel Mirembe, a cattle keeper, says they have been offering excess milk freely to people who need it. She says a pint of fresh milk is now 2 cents compared to $1 6 months ago.
I produce close to 100 liters of milk per day, but the dairies are not buying it. I have tried to add value by making yogurt and ghee, but no one is buying. We are consuming it ourselves. We are helpless.
In the absence of wholesale traders who previously collected the food directly from villages, now some farmers are taking their produce to local markets in major towns using bicycles in the hope for better prices.
The biggest problem is the closure of borders. We don't have a market for this food. We are now investing a lot of our time and money to move products across the country looking for market. It's not easy, and we sometimes make losses.
At the recent Regional Heads of State Summit held online, Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni called on African leaders to open up their markets to the country's surplus food stocks.
It's a dilemma that some parts of Africa don't have enough food.
here the food is rotting. This is really not good management. So we should cooperate and take advantage of all these advantages.
The UN wants governments like Uganda to introduce regulation to reduce post-harvest losses in food supply chains at national and regional levels. Farmers in Uganda looking forward to reopening of the borders so that they can secure their properties from banks and put some money in their pockets. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Western Uganda.
Kenya, South Africa and Nigeria are using farming technologies to attract young people into agriculture. For this and more, join us tomorrow. Back to you in studio.
And CGTN's Lindy Mtongana will of course be continuing that series in the course of the week. For now, time for a break. Here's what's coming up. A top court in the in the EU is ruling that member states must curb mass spying on individuals' data. And Australia's central bank keeps the country's interest rate on hold.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
Welcome back. Let's run through some stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in West Africa, the economic bloc ECOWAS has lifted sanctions which were imposed on Mali after a coup d'etat that took place there in August. This comes in the wake of the naming of a full transitional government by the country's prime minister earlier this week on Monday. In a communique, the regional heads of state cited significant advances, as they saw it, towards a return to democracy in the country, noting the recent selection of a civilian president and prime minister to head that entire process. Over in Kenya, the highly anticipated court ruling over the 2013 attack on the Westgate Mall has been postponed yet again, this time until Wednesday. No reason was given this time round. 3 men are accused of aiding Al-Qaeda-linked militants to launch the attack, in which 67 people were killed. Somali Islamist insurgents, Al-Shabaab, claimed the responsibility for the September 21st attack on the shopping complex. The Ethiopian Parliament and House of Federation have officially started their work schedule after a 2-month break. Speaking at a joint session of the two houses, the country's president, Saleh Okuzude, said that peace and security, holding a general election and boosting economic output are the government's top priorities in the next 12 months. And back to West Africa, Sierra Leone's President Julius Maada Bio has suspended several civil servants who were implicated in a recent graft report. They include the Minister of Agriculture and the Secretary to the Vice President. The report by a special commission of inquiry implicated several former and current civil servants, including the former President Ernest Bai Koroma, in the theft of public funds. That's a run through your headlines. Onto the European Union. The bloc's top court has ruled that unrestrained mass surveillance of phone and internet data is unlawful. Now, the EU court said that the general and indiscriminate retention of that kind of information can only be allowed when governments face a serious threat to national security. It added that in this situation, the full access to phone and internet users' data should be limited to a period that is strictly necessary and clearly defined. Privacy rights advocacy groups had filed this particular case. Analysts said the move would essentially curb the powers of agencies engaged in espionage in France and other EU member states. Moving down under, Australia's Reserve Bank says it's keeping the nation's interest rates on hold. That announcement comes despite increasing concerns about the COVID-19 pandemic's impact on the Australian economy. Here's Greg Navarro with this report from Sydney.
Just a few weeks ago, a growing number of economists had predicted that the Reserve Bank of Australia would slash the nation's interest rate during its October meeting, especially after the RBA had hinted at doing so a month ago. But it appears the Reserve Bank has decided to keep the cash rate at 0.25% for a bit longer. Now, one possible explanation for not moving is that the October meeting is taking place on the same day that the federal government is handing down its budget. The RBA doesn't want to be seen in any way as distracting from that budget. All of this is part of a strategy to help stimulate Australia's economy in the midst of a pandemic-fueled recession, the country's first recession in nearly 3 decades. And some economists believe the nation's unemployment rate could inch toward 10% by the end of the year in a recession that the federal treasurer has described as a crisis like no other. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
The British Finance Minister Rishi Sunak is warning of the risks posed by the country's debt mountain, and he says that the government does need to fix public finances. The UK is on course for its biggest fiscal deficit since the Second World War ended, with public debt topping £2 trillion sterling. Sunak added that the government could not count on borrowing costs remaining close to zero or even protect every single job. They will, however, he says, do their best to support as many citizens as they can.
We have a sacred responsibility to future generations to leave the public finances strong. And through careful management of our economy, this Conservative government will always balance the books. If instead we argue there is no limit on what we can spend, that we can simply borrow our way out of any hole, what is the point in us?
Millions of people in Paris are preparing for new coronavirus restrictions. The French capital is about to shut down bars and cafes for the next 2 weeks in order to curb a rise in infections. CGTN's Ross Cullen has the details.
Putting the brakes on the virus. That's what the authorities in Paris hope the new measures will do. The French capital is now in the maximum alert zone and pressure on hospitals is starting to increase.
À compter donc de demain.
From tomorrow, all bars will have to be closed. Restaurants, which are defined as establishments whose main activity is the sale of meals, will be able to remain open at their usual times, subject to strict compliance with a new health protocol validated by the High Council of Public Health.
This is a targeted tightening of restrictions. Restaurants will be allowed to stay open, but bars will have to close for the next fortnight.
Financially, it's very complicated. Restaurants will listen to more than bars. Compared to last year, our income is down 70%. And then there were the yellow vest and the pension reform protests. So it's really been a black year.
The 3 criteria to be classed as a maximum alert zone are the general rate of virus prevalence, its spread among older people, and the number of intensive care hospital beds taken up by coronavirus patients. Ensuring customers use hand sanitizer and wear face masks are measures that are already in place in restaurants. But from now on, they'll only be able to open in Paris if they adhere to further health protocols, such as taking customers' details to help with track and trace and putting a limit on the total number of people who could sit at any one table. Marseille was put on maximum alert last week, and its restaurants and bars were forced to shut, causing anger among business owners. Bistros are now back open, but bars remain closed. For many Paris businesses, this move brings back bad memories of the lockdown in the spring. Now, with a second wave of new infections, comes a second wave of new restrictions. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
On to South America now. How to get from point A to point B safely amid a pandemic has become quite the issue as Colombians trying to regain some semblance of normalcy in this coronavirus pandemic. Ride-hailing apps like Didi are now trying to provide a solution. CGTN's Michelle Begue filed this report from Bogota.
Before COVID-19, 44-year-old Álvaro Barreto would make nearly $80 a day as a driver for ride-sharing apps. Colombia's lockdowns forced him to stop working, and he relied on his savings to get through it. It has been 2 months since he could pick up rides again. This time, he chose Chinese ride-hailing app Didi.
With other apps, they take 25% commission, and Didi only takes 10%. It's very satisfying for me, and customers don't take a hit.
Latin America is Didi's biggest market outside of its home base, China. Brazil, Mexico, Costa Rica, Chile, Colombia, and Panama all have this ride-hailing service. In Colombia, these platforms have weathered their share of controversies as national lawmakers try to regulate them. But the pandemic has been creating new opportunities. Public transportation is only operating at 50% occupancy to help contain the spread of coronavirus. Users of ride-hailing apps say they find a sense of security from social distancing. They have the vehicle to themselves.
My biggest interest is peace of mind, and what brings me that peace of mind is not riding a bus, because a bus driver is looking to transport a large amount of people.
I feel safer. They give me antibacterial gel before getting in the vehicle.
Ride-hailing apps like Didi have set to deploy safety gear for its drivers. Álvaro Barreto says Didi offers him cleaning stations for disinfection every 8 days. While COVID-19 did present challenges for Didi and its competitors, ride-hailing companies may be able to expand their market share as the economy reopens, if they can convince more customers that they are the safest option. Michelle Begue, CGTN, Bogota, Colombia.
A quick run through commodities for you. So on the oil side, Brent and WTI are both posting gains at this point in time. Brent up 3% to around $42.70 a barrel, or at least close to it. LME copper, however, is in the red. That's down about 0.4%. Cocoa futures, however, the soft side, that's a little more interesting for us on this side of the world. Down 0.9%. It's extending to its largest slump so far since 2016, according to Bloomberg data. It's been declining consecutively for 9 trading sessions now. The question, of course, that some traders are asking is how strong rather, is demand going to be over the medium term? Here's what's coming up next. When we come back, we'll sample a traditional stew that warms the hearts of Egyptians. Our culinary journey continues shortly.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Now, Egypt has its own staple foods that tend to define the taste of Egypt, if you will. And that covers everything from mashed fava bean sandwiches to fava falafel and kosheri. But there's one particular traditional dish that has a special place in the hearts of almost all Egyptians. On Grassroots tonight, CGTN's Adel El-Marouki has the story of this green stew that has outstanding nutritional value and a mouth-watering taste.
Every morning, these women come here to separate the leaves from the stem. The scientific name for this plant is Corchorus oletorius. also known as jute mallow. But here in Egypt, it is named after the delicious local dish made out of it, molokhia. The dish has more iron than spinach, more potassium than bananas, and is very rich in calcium, magnesium, phosphorus. More importantly, it's super delicious. After it becomes a paste, the leaves then leave to Sobhi Kabir, a popular restaurant here in Cairo, and I followed it.
For 8 years, I've been working here as a molokhia cook. That's the only dish I do. I learnt a special way to do it, and I've become an expert in it. It's all that I can do.
This is one of the busiest kitchens in the Egyptian capital. Molokhia, however, is prepared in its own section, far from the noise, so the cooks could focus. They mix the paste with fresh meat and pigeon's broth, adding to it dried coriander to turn it into a stew. When the leaves are cooked, it's mixed with fried chopped garlic. Sounds simple? Yet not any chef could adjust this stew to garlic ratio or the broth taste. Any error in the mixture could make the dish lose its texture.
Garlic is the most important ingredient in molokhia. It gives it about 60 to 70% of its flavor. There isn't a table here that doesn't order molokhia. Let me show you how it's served.
This is the most important step of making molokhia. When the stew is mixed with the fried garlic, it makes a sound. We call it tasha. In Egyptian tradition, if a kind-hearted cook gasps during the tasha, the molokhia will taste better than ever. Of course, that doesn't happen in restaurants, but the tasha has gained significance, and many chefs like Zizo try to make it as entertaining as possible. It is now the guests' turn to enjoy. Molokhia is usually eaten with bread folded to a cone shape. We say a cat's ear shape. As for the taste,
Molokhia here is out of this world. The only thing missing is our famous bread in the rural. It is spongy, so a dip of bread carries a lot of the stew.
I come here at least once a month to enjoy the molokhia. The first thing I order is molokhia. There's no Egyptian who doesn't like it. It's who we are.
the stew may look unattractive, but only to those who haven't tasted it. Once it's in your mouth, it becomes so hard to let go of it. Ramon Nassif hasn't been to Egypt in a year and a half. As soon as he arrived, his wife brought him here for the best molokhia in town.
When I came here, I have to eat molokhia. Give it to me back, all the memory from my childhood. Every Egyptian, they love molokhia. It's traditional food. It's like that's how we grow up with Egypt here. So you can say the molokhia, it's like the hamburger in America.
Because it has no animal protein, molokhia is quite affordable. With all its nutritious values, it's a super and delicious food available to everyone. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
From bond yields, debt defaults, to, of course, delicious culinary experiences. That wraps up this edition of Global Business Africa. As usual, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. Well, today's up next from Washington, D.C.